Welcome to Lessons I Learned in Law, the weekly podcast by Heriot Brown In-House Legal Recruitment. I'm Scott Brown and I'm a recovering lawyer and founder of Heriot Brown. And each week I'll be bringing you conversations with leading legal minds who've found fulfilling paths in their careers. We dive into their unique stories and the lessons that they've learned, discovering how each guest defines success in their own way. Whether it's navigating big risks or sharing pivotal moments and career successes and how they got to the place they are in their career. Our guests offer insights and experiences that you won't really find elsewhere. It's an open conversation, so tune in each week for fresh perspectives and real chats that highlight the diverse paths to a rewarding career in law. Hi guys. Thanks for joining me. On this week's show, I'm joined by Anoop Joshi, Chief Trust Officer at Trustpilot. Now, Anoop's role as Chief Trust Officer is something that I'm seeing more and more within the legal space, either the role or the function of trust sitting within the position of CLO, or as Anoop has this new position of Chief Trust Officer, which also embodies legal, compliance, and a whole host of other things. So really expanded role sitting on the executive team at Trustpilot. Now, Anoop's position and his background is really interesting. He spent a part of his career in the early days in software as a software developer, got a real exposure to product and has a real interest in technology. And he's moved back into the legal world, so not your atypical profile. Now, the three lessons he has, really, the one that stood out for me was holding your principles and being principled. And that really encompasses how you define your value, how you define what it is that you stand for as an in-house lawyer, which I think is really important, and defining your red lines early on in your career. So, it's great to hear about that. We also talk about project management and looking at bigger picture and horizon scanning. And there's loads in there for everyone. I really enjoyed this conversation and I hope you do too. So we'll dive in. Hi, Anoop. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
Thank you. Thanks for joining me. We were just talking before hitting record. We met, must have been pre-COVID, very briefly. I think it was a legal 500 event in London. So it's good to catch up properly.
Yeah, great to reconnect, Scott.
Yeah. You're a big event attender and legal events. What's your take on that?
I am and I amn't. So, this year, I think I would say I spent more of my time in legal adjacent events. Uh-huh. So a lot of what my work revolves around, and we'll come to this, is the world of trust and safety and content moderation. And there's a huge hotbed of things going on, be it events or speaking opportunities, and end up spending a lot more of my time in that space right now. Right. Albeit we were happened to a few dinners through the year.
Yeah. That's good. Nice. So I've given a brief introduction to your background, and but it'd be great to hear if we could start just with a bit of an overview of your current role. If you could share that with us, please.
Sure. So I'm the Chief Trust Officer at Trustpilot. Now that's a title you don't hear a lot, but you're starting to see more and more of this role across bigger businesses. So what is that? What does it mean? So effectively, I'm responsible for all of the legal work that happens within Trustpilot. So I have that Chief Legal Officer role. But in addition to that, I'm also involved with a lot of what we do around content moderation, around the detection of fake reviews. Public affairs sits in my space as well. And my role is all about ensuring people can trust in the content that they read on Trustpilot, but that they can also trust that Trustpilot as an organization is doing the right things. Mm-hmm. And having the title of Chief Trust Officer puts a lot of responsibility on my shoulders and making sure that we're doing that across all the different regions and areas that we operate in.
Yeah. Nice. So what other areas, so legal adjacent and cross function stuff, what does that involve?
Yeah, so on the legal side of things, it's our commercial legal teams. Mm-hmm. It's things like employment, law, it's our procurement work, our privacy related work, regulatory aspects of the work that we do, and the general compliance of the organization as well all sits within the legal work. And then in the legal adjacent space, it's things like policy, litigation and disputes, which falls within legal, but a lot of that litigation work in a user-generated content platform like Trustpilot emanates from our content moderation work. And just to give you a sense of the sort of size and scale, Trustpilot receives around about 5 to 6 million reviews every month. A proportion of those will be challenged either by consumers whose reviews we may remove because of breaches of our guidelines, or by businesses who are unhappy with the content in reviews. Some of those will escalate into full-blown litigation, and we've had some high-court litigation through the course of the last few years, right down to regional claims in small county courts in England or markets like Germany and France as well. So we see a whole range of different issues, and they all emanate from, or they mostly emanate from the content that's submitted to the platform.
On there. Oh wow. Loads to dig into. So wait, the trust officer. So you mentioned it's sort of an area or a title that you see popping up. What other industries or what sectors is that kind of most prevalent within?
Great question. So you see it a lot in industries similar to Trustpilot in that they have a focus on content, and particularly user-generated content. You're seeing it in businesses where there is, at scale, some level of submission of content. So in the Trustpilot context, it's reviews, but in other platforms like Twitch is a good example of an online gaming platform where there are a lot of legal issues, but they go broader than just the straightforward legal issues that you have to deal with in terms of compliance with laws and regulations. And it's about ethics, and it's about doing the right thing by your users. And the sort of surface area of some of these platforms, the number of consumers that are interacting on those platforms or users that are impacted by those platforms, means that you have to take a much more holistic view of some of the risks and some of the challenges that are posed by the platform. And that's where this chief trust officer role really comes in. And you're seeing it in businesses like Zoom and some other businesses in our industry as well, where this role of trust and safety is becoming much, much more important. And for a lot of businesses, this is now coming to be at the same level of privacy, data protection, data security. Is like, how are you ensuring trust on the platform? And then you're also seeing that in the regulatory response as well with the Online Safety Act in the UK, the Digital Services Act in Europe, the FTC making rules in the US as well. That there's this strive and drive for platforms and online businesses to do much more in this space.
Yeah, there's loads going on in the space from the regulatory angle. So we'll jump into your life's energy saving life goals. We'll jump into lesson 1, if that's all right.
Sure. So the first lesson I would share with anybody in the legal practice, but in particular in an in-house role, is about project management.
Right.
And I think it's a term that we often use quite fleetingly. It's like, as a lawyer, you'll be in this role and you'll manage these projects and you'll be able to deliver across a number of different areas. But from my experience, getting really good and effective at project management can be something that can supercharge your career. So what do I mean by that? What do I mean by project management? Because like I say, it's a term that's often quite loosely used, but not very well understood.
Yeah.
But as a lawyer, you're often at the core, at the heart of an issue that may arise within an organization. But the ability, like in particular as an in-house lawyer, the ability to effect the change that you need within the organization is incredibly important. So some examples of that from my career. I remember back 2016, 2017, we had the GDPR coming in, this huge flagship piece of EU legislation that, 10 years later, we see really did have a dramatic change on the way that that the companies handle data, how they respond to consumers. And I was at Skyscanner at the time. Skyscanner, as many of your listeners will know, was a very fast growing business in the travel meta search industry.
Yeah.
And it had grown very quickly in terms of different locations all over the world, different ways of transferring and sharing data. And along comes this piece of legislation that really ratchets up the responsibility of data controllers and data processors as well. And in order to get on top of that and actually deliver against our obligations as a platform, it wasn't just about the legal team sitting down, creating a set of instructions and guidelines for the business to then react against. That would be a recipe for failure. What it meant to really succeed in that space is to go and work and business partner, build those relationships with the key people who you're going to be relying on to deliver the compliance that you need. And when it doesn't go right, the people are going to come back to the legal team and ask the questions of the legal team. Hey, why did we not comply with this piece of legislation? You got to build out those relationships. But often at times, it can be really difficult to get people to engage with what they see as compliance or what they see as something that's not the most important thing in their world. As lawyers, I think you have to be really cognizant of the fact that, this is not the most important thing for an engineer who's working on 5 different projects.
Yeah.
And as much as you try to bang the table or make noise about it, it's not going to be the most important thing. So how can you business partner with them to really make it as easy as straightforward, and also for them to recognize the value? All of that, to me, goes into project management.
Yeah.
And if you get effective at that, building those relationships, understanding and building empathy for the situations that other people are in, it can be a real supercharger for your career. And how you do it is really spending time understanding where those other stakeholders that you're dealing with are coming from. What are the demands on their time? What are the challenges that they're facing? You can really build that up. You can drive amazing results off the back of it.
And do you have a process or a playbook for your team to follow on that front, like getting in amongst those types of issues, or how do you teach someone or train that mindset to think about things from other people's perspective?
It's a great question. So if you ask someone in my team, what would Anoop's response be to what do we do next? They will tell you that it's got to start with a table. And what I mean by that is you've got to set out clearly and spend the time thinking really clearly, what are the key elements that need to happen or need to be delivered within this project? Go back to something like the GDPR. You've got various articles that you've got to comply against, right? How do you create a business-friendly document and approach that can help you manage through that? So what's the article? What does this mean for the business, right? What are the key issues here? What are the challenges? Who needs to be involved? Who needs to drive this thing? When does it need to be done by? That becomes like your text sort of Bible starting point for how do we actually deliver against this. And then you don't need to get people to engage with lengthy text or more detailed papers, but you can actually drive that project management through measuring and managing tasks through something as simple as a table, a spreadsheet, whatever it is, but take the thinking out of long form documentation and distill your thinking down. Like, it's so important to recognize that for the vast majority of people in an in-house context, they don't really care about the ins and outs or the minutiae of the legal issues. They expect you to have considered that already. And what they really want to know is, like, what do we need to do to move to the next place to get to where we need to go?
Right.
So being able to distill your thinking down and then track and manage that in a way that's not too overly burdensome. Because sometimes, I'll give that advice to someone who's maybe relatively new within the team, and they'll come back with a table that's, 100 rows deep, 50 columns long, and it just becomes an importation of the unmanageable document into an unmanageable table. So strive to spend a lot of time on distilling that down to the really important stuff. And I think the lookout for a lot of lawyers is, I think you're very desperate to show you've done the work and you've done the working and no detailed thinking that goes behind it. And that's great, and you should absolutely do that, and that should sit somewhere else. But when you're interfacing and engaging with a business, you've got to be light on the details, but like very clear on the decisive tasks around what happens next. And yeah, my team will tell you that a table is often the answer to doing that.
And they've got to justify their 6-minute increments, lawyers. So that's
exactly
drilled in. Got to have the reasons for why you've charged your hourly rate. Have you done any specific like project management training or anything that's helped you adapt to that? Or
I've been in the very fortunate position of working in companies with outstanding product management and project management teams that I've learned from. So I've not done any specific training like Prince or Agile or anything like that. But what I have done is through a process of osmosis and just the experience of getting it right and making it better and looking back on how you can improve things over time. Being able to improve that skill set and approach. And it's very much one of those areas of progress over perfection as well. And again, often I look at for a lot of lawyers is like you're very much brought up in a world where you got to get the right answer, you've got to get it right immediately, and small capacity in a lot of places for not getting it right first time. But with things like this, you're never going to get it right first time. If you go in assuming you're not going to be perfect at it, well, you create a huge amount of space for yourself to actually do something impactful. And that's a really important aspect of the mindset to bring into something like project management.
Great. So I was really keen to chat about because your background and your the experience that you've had along the way in your career that's got you to where you are. Talk me through your sort of untraditional career path. I would call it.
Yeah, it's very atypical. So casting my mind back to university, right? And I was sort of at a crossroads, I suppose, in career-wise, where I was studying law. I was at Strathclyde University and very interested in technology. And I'd actually started my own business. And this maybe ages me a little bit, but I was in my own business doing like computer networking and Wi-Fi networks at the time.
Okay.
Well, businesses and people at home. So that sort of ages me without revealing my age. And really interested in tech, really interested in IT, but found an avenue to really scratch that itch within the world of intellectual property law, computer and internet law, which was like an emerging practice at the time. And so sort of hitched my wagon to I'm going to continue down the legal track right now. Trained and qualified at McClay Murray Spence as it was then, now Denton's. Went into intellectual property, both contentious and non-contentious work early on in my career. Still had that itch, right? Still had that itch to do something different. And I was about into my second year of qualification, and my wife and I had just had our first child as well. So she was about 4 or 5 months old at the time. And I thought to myself, I really do want to scratch this itch around tech. I see myself getting more and more responsibility. I'm married, I've got a house, got a child. If I don't do this now, I can see a world where I don't make a leap.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of friends working in tech and had been spending time with one particular business and was talking to the founder there about what I wanted to do. And he was like, I'll tell you what, right? I've got some legal issues that would be helpful to have someone to help with that. We're fundraising, we're a small startup. We've got a really great development team. Why don't you join us and you can learn some development work. You can start building tech and software and we can have this mutually beneficial relationship. So big decision to make at that time because I was pretty good career ahead of me in law, was doing really well in that whole space, but this opportunity arises and a few discussions with my wife, and a few weeks later I was like, right, okay, I'm going to do this. So
how did you know that person? How did you meet them? So
this is back in like 2012. I I would go to a lot of the tech meetups that were hosted at some of the at Skyscanner and FanDuel back in those days, and actually just as a part of, as many lawyers will know, business development in the early days, right, of your career, and just trying to find the right places to go to speak to businesses who might be the bigger businesses of tomorrow, and just building relationships through that networking.
Right.
I mean, as an aside, learning so much at that point as well, early in your careers, like stepping out and going to some of these events, which can, depending on the demands of the role, you can always find a reason not to go along to some of these things.
Yeah.
In terms of expanding your horizons and speaking to other people. So that's what happened here.
Right.
And so, handed in my resignation and took a very bold and brave step to like join this business. I was on the side doing some software development, and JavaScript and Ruby was the language of the day back then, and trying to build my own applications with like in the legal space. And that really supercharged things for me, right? So the business that I joined was Float. A guy called Colin Sheatt is the CEO, still is the CEO there, and it was 3 people at that time,
right?
And we actually built that business up, quite significantly over the course of the next 2 years. I learned to build applications, like web applications. We were building JavaScript and Ruby based cash flow forecasting applications, so helping small businesses predict what their cash was going to do in the future.
Okay. Right.
Essentially, really impactful space. That took us to Silicon Valley. That took us to building a business out in Australia, growing this thing across the US and Europe as well. And then I got an approach to come back into private practice. Right. And it was a really interesting point that I went through throughout that journey when I reflect on it. I spent like many years becoming a lawyer, had my diploma, had a master's in intellectual property law. And then all of a sudden I was like doing some legal work in-house in the startup, but most of my time was on product and on engineering and development. And I'll be perfectly honest, I sort of missed saying I'm a lawyer.
Okay. Yeah.
Or being a lawyer.
Yeah.
And there's a part of me that's, some might argue it's a bit of a sunk cost fallacy, but I spent so much time in the space. Actually, I would love to bring this back to how can I combine these two areas, two passions. And so I got an offer to go back into private practice, and I did that. And I mean, the truth is, I lasted about 18 months because I'd had this taste of a world where you were operating in a much different way. To your point, not billing my time in 6-minute increments and really looking at value generation in a completely different way. So, I mean, it was great, and the work was really interesting. It was an opportunity to bring some of the tech startup world into that legal practice as well. But I then got an opportunity to join the legal team at Skyscanner. So this was just after their acquisition by Ctrip.
Okay.
And that was like the perfect role for me, because all of a sudden I got this opportunity to work in a very engineering and product-led business, doing legal work, which was impacting more than 100 million consumers every month. I was actually getting to do some engineering work there as well. So I was able to combine both of those passions into one place. And from Skyscanner to Trustpilot, it's been a similar sort of journey where I've been able to combine those things. And at Trustpilot, a lot of what we do is around how do we detect fake reviews? How do we use data to get better? How are we using algorithms? And now more recently, how are we using technologies like generative AI and being able to straddle both the legal and regulatory world and some of the challenges that are arising there, but also having that empathy and understanding from the tech side has been a real great opportunity to bridge these things. And so it all comes together and it conspires together to this role of Chief Trust Officer.
Yeah, awesome. That step out and step back in must just give you a whole fresh perspective on the legal advice you're giving as well. It's just it's cool to have seen that. We'll move on to lesson 2.
Yeah, so lesson 2 is very linked to what we were talking about in terms of bringing a multi-disciplinary approach. But I would say my second lesson is about having your eyes up to the horizon, right? And, my experiences in private practice and as a a more junior lawyer as well, is that it's so very easy to just get consumed by the work that you have to do and your to-do list, and everything that comes with the trappings of being either in private practice or just being junior and being someone who is like work is directed towards you. You're not really making things happen as much. And looking up to the horizon for me is about seeing what are the opportunities that are coming down the tracks, not at a personal level, but also just at an industry level and how you're operating. It's seeing how other people are doing things as well. And I think that advice is very timely now, as we're seeing a lot of changes in the way that people are handling knowledge work, right? So from the way people are using generative AI within tech and other industries as well to streamline and make the work more effective, make the work more impactful. But also just to seeing how you can take things from other disciplines and apply them to legal practice. And I'll give you a really good example of that. So going back to my time at Skyscanner, being new into the team, and we used to have this weekly meeting, right? A weekly meeting where we would distribute the work that was coming into the legal inbox. And I think anyone at an in-house team will have some experience of how do you do distribution through your centralized like legal intake process. This is going back a few years, and the technology's gotten much better now. But when I was in the tech company and we had to build out our own sort of customer support team, right? And it was about a change of the view, right? Of this legal intake is effectively a customer support channel, right? So let's stop looking at like what's a better legal intake tool, and let's just look at the market for what are the best customer support tools out there to do what we do. And there's a particular tool that we were using in our startup, brought out to the team, said, right, this is what this tool does. It assumes you've got a team of number of people who are recipients of work that comes in through a centralized channel. This tool will distribute that work right, in a fair way. We took it from having like a 2-hour weekly team meeting, which also meant there was a drag time in terms of responses, right? Because you had to wait to distribute the work. There was a selective nature to how that was going to. Well, actually, we can use effectively a round robin technology that gets work to the right people. And it was just, how do you bring something from another world into the world that you're operating in? Some of that is through building relationships with people in different disciplines, just listening. How do you do X in your business? How do you do Y in your business? And then applying it to the ways of working. And I think there's such a great opportunity now where you see so many new and interesting tools. You just got to manage the distraction of that, right? So like, how do you get to a place where what you're doing is impactful and actually improving your ways of working?
Yeah, there's always the shiny new thing that is distracting and takes up the time, just leads to a bit of procrastination. I find that like in our business we're service provider, so there's traditional ways of doing things, but always try to swim against the tide and do, rather than looking at what's your competitors doing and looking at other industries, exactly like you've said, what can you cherry pick from elsewhere. I also think it's a good point that loops back to your, I guess, going to your networking within non-legal spaces. Like there's a bit of incestuousness to going and hearing about what other legal functions are doing over and over again, as opposed to what are different teams doing or what are different types of businesses doing. And in our early days, like when we were smaller, I was in that WeWork. I just found it brilliant, having a beer on a Friday, chatting to people that were in small businesses doing whatever it was that we're doing. But you would, right, that's interesting that you do that. Like you cherry pick a few things that you'd trial out as well. So yeah, no, I think it's really important to think outside the box in that way.
Totally agree. That cross-pollination of ideas and just being open to that as well. And yeah, to your point about mixing in legal crowds, I think what you get out of that is a lot of incrementalism. If you really want to drive change, you've got to change your perspective and change your view. And the best way to do that is by spending time with people who may have opposing views to you, may think about things in a completely different way. And just being open to that is massive.
Yeah. And has there been in terms of people that you've like mentors or people that you've had as leaders in your careers, there people that have encouraged that type of behavior?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would always seek out those types of mentors as well. But certainly in my, I call it my startup days, when I was working in the software tech world, the CEO there, Colin, was such a great advocate for that. He was a very product driven individual. And he was always coming up with like, oh, I'm seeing that this is happening in this space or someone else is doing this. What do we think about that? And actually making the room for that within the team.
Right.
And that's something I've always brought with me and try to encourage to the teams that I lead now.
Yeah.
I lead like a very diverse set of teams, from lawyers to non-lawyers, working in either fraud or content moderation or public affairs. And one of the common things is, how do you bring those teams together and talk about things that, something like happening in the public affairs space, a tool or a technology they're using, or what they're hearing is happening out on the ground, that someone in the content moderation space thinks, well, that's actually something that we could be thinking about, or something we could be doing, or within the organization. I've actually just come from a session where we do demos every week, right? Where different teams talk about what they're doing. And that's not just tech teams and product teams. That's the legal teams talking about what they're doing, talking about the challenges that they're going through. And we're sort of forcing that cross-pollination. But there's nothing better than someone coming into a room with a problem and someone else being there and saying, actually, got a really great idea. Yeah. Let's collaborate on how we can work on that. And you can apply that to your career and across so many different ways, as well as you build out your network.
Yeah. What about those in like private practice in a law firm, or in an area where they're siloed, focused on detail, time being an issue or an excuse to thinking in that way? Like, what any small steps someone can take or to feel impactful? What would you say to someone in that situation?
I think if you think about your role in that way, right, it can be quite a limiting. It can be quite a limiting view. I always think about how you prioritize your time, right? Like, often I found myself and others in private practice saying the same thing over and over again, which is, I don't have time to do X, right? But that's a reframing, or that needs a reframing. And the reframing there is like, it's not a priority for me to do X. And if you start to think about it in the priorities versus time, all of a sudden you're looking at that challenge in a different way. So when someone's, when I was in private practice, well, I don't have time to go to this networking event, or I don't have time to go look at other tools or ways of working. It wasn't really about having time. It was just about saying, this is not a priority to me. So how do you think about how you prioritize some of those things when you're in private practice? Right? Do you want to work more efficiently? Do you want to be able to do more things? Are you carving out time to be a more effective and impactful lawyer? If you think about it as a personal development side, and you want to prioritize personal development, I think that's where you can find that time.
Yeah.
And we all have busy peaks and troughs. And I have a lot of sympathy for the private practice lawyers being on the other side of that. And, some of the expectations we set on them as well. Big empathy there. But I think you do have to push through that often, if you really want to affect some change.
Yeah. And yeah, there's always a route out, right? It's taking the as you say, prioritizing, probably a bit of upselling as well. Some of those intentions and ways of working to a more traditional environment where it's not as receptive or led from the front. So good advice. Great. Well, we'll move on to lesson 3. If you could share that.
The third lesson is about having principles or values, or whichever word you want to choose for it, but being intentional about your principles, being intentional about the red lines that you have at an individual level, and sticking to them to the extent that I think it's important to have strong opinions but loosely held, so that you can change your mind over time. But to know what those are and actually take the time to think about what those are. And again, particularly in the in-house context, separate to private practice, where you're always on the fringes of private practice in terms of the advice you give, and you can carve out and caveat, and it's very easy to sit outside of an organization and say this is the right thing, this is the wrong thing. But as you get in-house and as you get pulled into the operations of a business and how a business is working as well, it's very easy to, what I say is like, go native, right? And you got to remember your role as a lawyer or as a general counsel is sometimes a step back or a step removed from the organization. Not in the way that you want to be a blocker, not in the way that you want to slow down progress, but it's really important to think about, well, what are these red lines? Because the business, the organization, will want to go in certain directions. Some of those might be challenging from a legal perspective, but some of those might just be outright the wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
It's very clear on that. And in a business like Trustpilot, where I am today, it's relatively easy. We've got trust in our name. We are, it's more to what we do is in doing the right thing. And at a very high level, that seems like a really easy thing to do. But when you break it down into the detail of some of the challenges we face and some of the decisions that we have to make, knowing where your red lines are is incredibly important, and the values that underpin those, because times of like hardship and challenge, that's the stuff that can see you through.
Yeah, and you can go one way or another, definitely.
And there's not a sort of set principles for different industries or individuals or areas of practice, but it's something in my like early careers. I had a mentor who talked to me a lot about that, and it was just a very simple question of, well, what are your values?
Yeah.
Or what do you value? What's important to you?
Yeah.
And that's changed over time.
Yeah, I was going to ask how much it's changed if you to look back.
Yeah, I would say like in the early days, what were my real values? As a junior lawyer, it was about accuracy. It was about I value having the correct answer. I value being responsive was a big one. So something comes in any time of the day, night, whatever it is, it was like, I think that's really important, the service level and all that kind of stuff. That's changed over time. I mean, not that I don't value those things. I think those things are incredibly important. But as you change in your career, as your role changes as well, from being an individual contributor much more up to a leader or manager of people, those values change. Right? Yeah. And my values today are much more about being like direct and clear in the feedback that I give to people.
Yeah.
Making sure that you're finding the right balance for people in the work that we do, helping the people in the teams that I manage to grow and to learn. But then also, as I've moved into like the executive team within the organization, is also being like a good citizen of and custodian of the organization. Completely changes the value set and the approach that you take. But the takeaway here is just to be very intentional and deliberate about that. And it can really help in some of those challenging spots in your career.
Yeah, I think it's something that we've seen, and we're talking to people more and more about, like a professional brand, and then that starts with like, what's your why? What are your values as an individual? The values of a legal team in itself are perhaps distinct from what the company values are, and defining those is really important. And yeah, I was just thinking there as you were talking, the change in those isn't a bad thing, because I think as you progress, you're almost trying to role model the next stage of where you want to go to. So like, it sounds like, what does excellent look like in my current role to make me like take the next step? And that might not be right now into general counsel position or head of legal, but what does excellence look like? And that's what you're known for, and you carry that through your career, right? And it's like building your network, and it all links back into that, and that leads to opportunities for growth opportunities if you have those well defined.
And there's something really something that I've come to learn and realize over the last few years as well, is that what makes a great general counsel, or what makes a great chief legal officer, or whatever role it is in an organization, that doesn't mean you have to be the same. You need to find your own excellence within this. And actually, it can be really challenging if you try to emulate someone else's success.
Yeah.
And there's an authenticity that you'll lack, and there's a personal level, like you are where you are today because somebody believed in you, right? And if you get that next state to that next stage or that next level, you'll be there because someone believed in you as well. But people don't generally tend to hire the same person, right? Generally, change happens because you want to see a change or you want to move something in a different direction. And so I think it's really important for particularly junior lawyers in their career not to necessarily look up and say, well, I have to be like this. I have to do things in a set way. Like, find your way to be impactful, know what impact is, and then drive towards that. But just don't feel like you have to slavishly copy what came before you. I think that's important. And I say that to my own teams as well. Like, my style is this. That doesn't mean that your style has to be like that.
Yeah.
It's complementary. The anecdote I often give is like, look, if you think about this like a football team, right? I don't need, and I'm going to give away my football team here, I don't need like 11 Mohamed Salahs. Right?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I need one Mohamed Salah, maybe two, that would be great. But I also need people to play other roles in the team as well, right? And you think about it like that. Not everyone has to be like the, who people think is the top performer.
Yeah.
Right. You find that balance right, it's great.
Yeah. No, it's great. It's great messaging, great advice. I love that one. Cool. So I'm asking a couple of killer final questions, but like a book recommendation and a podcast recommendation, other than you don't have to say lessons I learned in law, obviously.
Well, yes. I'll start with the book recommendation, and there's some recency bias in this because I read this fairly recently and it's very relevant to my role right now. But there's a book called The Personal MBA by a guy called Josh Hoffman. A relatively popular book, and he starts that book by saying, I was really interested in doing an MBA. Would have to spend X thousands of pounds to do that MBA to get all these lessons that I would learn. We put them into a book, and actually, you read through that book, and what's great about that, and this is not to say don't go do an MBA or anything. That choice is yours. But as you grow in your career, and particularly the place I am today in an executive team, right? You move from a place where everything you do is law to like you're the only person talking about law in the room. And you're in a room where someone's talking about finance and someone's talking about marketing and so, every subject but your own. You're there to represent your area, your area. And all of a sudden you're in these conversations where people are talking about these areas and you think, well, I've not spent the last 15 to 20 years in any of these places. Right? And this book was just a wonderful way. It's like a cheat or a hack to say, right, okay, here's the top things you need to know in finance, in marketing, in strategy. And it was just a really great entry point and understanding at a level, because I think particularly the more senior you get, I think you can sit in a room and nod your head and act as if you know what someone else is talking about. And you can probably get away with it for a large proportion of the time. But if you really want to know and you really want to be impactful in the role that you have, it's really important to understand.
Yeah, be curious.
Why that matters. So
what's that like day one of stepping into the exec?
Day one of stepping into the exec is I think it would be weird if someone said they weren't filled with imposter syndrome.
Right.
And it depends who you're replacing or who's come before you, but certainly it's a whole new way of thinking about things, right? And an exec team, or a high-performing exec team, is not talking about necessarily everything that's going on in the business, but about how do we work on the business, how do we improve the organization. And so the type of conversation that you're involved with is just different, and you've got to raise your standard or change your standard to engage with that. I think about the things you talk about in an exec team being very different to the things that you talk about with your leadership team in a legal sense, right? Because that level of detail that you have within your legal team is not the level of detail that you're going to take over to the exec team. So it's, being able to pitch to the right audience and share your messages clearly, succinctly, and in an impactful way, but it's just a different way of talking. And I think the risk actually for particularly lawyers going into an exec team is you are so hung up on the details of everything that's going on or of a particular issue that it can be a bit of a challenge getting it to a place where everyone else in that team understands the problem, understands the challenge. So I think that's really interesting. And, to my earlier point as well, I think getting accustomed to the fact that you're the only person in the team that does what you do. For most people, prior to getting into an exec team, they're going to have been in a team where everyone does something similar to what you do. And so your representations there and the way that you operate is very different.
Thanks for sharing that, because I don't often hear it, and having stepped up into it is cool to get the insights whilst they're fresh. To be fair, given it's been a relatively it was in the relative near past, and the podcast recommendation.
So the podcast recommendation. This is absolutely my favorite. Whenever a new episode of the Lex Friedman podcast comes out, I'm all over it. Right. He is like a machine learning expert, and he has these very long, very detailed interviews with pretty prominent people from, and presidents, ex-presidents, to Elon Musk, to people who are operating in interesting industries like Sam Altman, for example. And what's good about his podcast, and this is no shame on the shorter podcasts out there, but he'll spend 3 to 4 hours with someone. This is multiple long drives or multiple evenings to get through one of these episodes, but he goes very deep, and he's one of those presenters that very much lets the guests talk about the subjects. So highly recommend that, and it's just a great opportunity to go deep in a subject that you probably don't know a huge amount about, but you come out thinking, wow, that was quite insightful. So recommend that one to everyone.
Sometimes when I go down those AI routes, what was I listening to recently? Sam Harris on AI. Oh my god, it scares the life out of me sometimes. But if you don't, you're better to know.
There's a lot of scary stuff happening in that space, but a lot of interesting stuff as well. And finding the balance between finding the truth in all of the sort of discussion and talk around AI it can be challenging.
Yeah. Great. Well, we'll wrap up there. But thank you. Thanks so much for sharing those lessons, and it's great to catch up and hear about the role. And first Chief Trust Officer I've spoken to anyway.
There you go. Thank you very much for having me, Scott.
Cheers. Enjoyed it.
See you.
Thanks. Hi, thanks for listening to today's show of Lessons I Learned in Law, the podcast powered by Harriet Brown. I really hope you got some value from it. It's the real reason that I set up the podcast, to help you, our audience of in-house lawyers or people within the legal profession, to learn from others in the industry. At Harriet Brown, we're a legal recruitment business that is driven by a mission to help lawyers find fulfillment in their careers. For us, this extends well beyond the transactional aspect of helping you find a new job or finding hires for your legal team. Where we excel is bringing the best people together and the right people together, which is why community has always been at the heart of our business. We really try to add real value to our network. So to keep up to date with everything going on in our community, make sure you subscribe to Lessons I Learned in Law on your favourite podcast platform. And if you've enjoyed this episode, leave us a review or share it with your friends and colleagues on social media. That would be much appreciated. Take care.